Good morning and welcome to Jew in the City Speaks with your host, Allison Josephs, also known as Jew in the City. This week is Shark Week on Discovery, which you may wonder, what does that possibly have to do with Orthodox Jews? Now, the truth is that we were looking for an opportunity to talk about sharks, and you also may be wondering why we were doing that. So a few months back, there was this viral sensation on TikTok where the Miami Boys Choir just blew up. It was kind of like during the high holiday season, and it was a really surprising and just wonderful moment where just the larger world was appreciating Jewish music and seeing like how cute and adorable these young Miami boys were. This is a Jewish group, singing group. So there's one singer that was kind of especially popular in the group named David Herskowitz. And after I interviewed him, one of our fans said, well, David's cool, but his wife is even cooler. And I said, do tell, why is that? And he said, because Yakira Herskowitz works with sharks. She is a scientist who works with sharks, which was pretty cool and fascinating because, I think in general, there are kind of just typical jobs that you see people doing, Jewish people doing, Orthodox Jewish people doing. And being a shark scientist is definitely not something I ever hear anyone doing outside of Jaws. And so we definitely wanted to have Yakira on, and we thought Shark Week was the perfect time to do that. And her exact title is Marine Ecologist, with a specialty on conservation and sharks. So Yakira, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Allison. I'm really happy to be here. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily cooler or even cooler than my husband, David, but I am grateful for the opportunity to talk about, like you said, something atypical in the Jewish world.
Yeah, a power couple is what we can call you. So, if you can, I guess, get us started with, how you grew up Jewishly, and then, we'll get into your interest in sharks next.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up kind of classic Orthodox Jewish life. I went to yeshiva day school and yeshiva high school. I went to, my middle school was RPRY. I went to Frisch. I did a gap year. I went to seminary at Ami. So all kind of like typical Jewish background. The only thing atypical in terms of my Jewish background is what I wanted to study and how I went about that within my Jewish bubble.
Okay, so let us know kind of like when, why, how did you develop this love of sharks?
So I've loved sharks since I was 11. I went to camp as a kid. I went to Camp Stone, and my counselor, Ramey Smith, told me that she liked sharks, and I thought she was crazy, but I loved her for everything else, so I thought maybe there's some validity to it. I got home that summer and kind of did a deep dive, no pun intended, into sharks and marine research and found that if I wanted to study sharks, then the path is through marine science. So I fell in love with sharks. It's kind of been downhill or uphill, as some may say, ever since. So for the last 16 years, I've been shark driven, and in order to study sharks, I went through formal education. So I knew I wanted to study sharks ultimately, and then I wanted to get a master's degree or a graduate degree. And so I got a bachelor's of science in environmental science and policy and wildlife ecology to get a broader understanding, and then proceeded to go for my master's in marine ecology and specifically in shark research and conservation. So it's always been a love of sharks and how to study sharks. It's kind of been a roundabout way. Some people say, oh, marine science, and then pick it. Species, for me, it was sharks. How do I get there? What do I do? And that's the approach I took.
So what do you love about sharks? What is so great about sharks?
So sharks are really misunderstood. As you mentioned, Allison, Jaws, like that's a lot of people have the association with sharks starting from the premise of Jaws and then the aftermath. So a lot of the association with sharks, like my initial reaction when my counselor told me she liked sharks, was fear and confusion, because sharks are made out to be these man-eaters and these unpredictable, scary creatures, when in actuality, they're so critical for the environment. And although some might not say it, I call them the underdogs of the sea. They're made out to be these bad, like man-eaters, as I said, but in actuality, they do so much for the ecosystem. They balance the ocean, and everything that we do on land comes from the oxygen and everything through the ocean. So without sharks balancing that could be messed up, and then we are impacted. So it really came from wanting to root for the underdog, which most people wouldn't agree, but I believe are sharks, and kind of just going about that route. And I've always liked to do things that help the underdog or the misunderstood. I also,
You have a mission to like rebrand sharks?
yeah, in a way, yeah. But in order to do that, I need to understand them more. So there's so much we know at a base level about sharks, but on a scientific level, we know so little in comparison to what they do. So I wanted to make a difference and via sharks and show everyone, listen, they're really important. I think it's also premised in Tikkun Olam is such a big aspect of Judaism to repair the world. And for me, that was through ocean. I've always been connected to nature. It's always been an amazing way for me to connect to religion and to God in nature. I always find the times that I feel the most spiritual is out by the water and nature. And so for me, Tikkun Olam is through helping and saving and spreading awareness about sharks.
Well, and also, in Genesis and Bereshit, Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava are kind of tasked with, guarding the world. So, it's not only like repairing, but this is, kind of the beginning commandment that, when man is put here, is to, sort of protect the world. I'm also thinking how like we are sort of aligned in a mission, like we're both rebranding the underdog. Us, the Jewish community uses the shark, misunderstood. It's very interesting. Is there anything, in particular, I'm sure you learned a lot of things about sharks, anything in terms of, sort of marveling at the greatness of God's creation, anything that you've learned about, facts about sharks or the ocean that has specifically kind of stopped you in your tracks or made you feel especially, in awe?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one aspect is a lot of sharks, we don't know a lot about their reproductive like journey, but a lot of shark species will go back to the place in which they were born in order to give birth. So it doesn't matter how far away they ventured or where they've gone, they'll return and know how to get there. So the fact that they can navigate through the oceans to get back to where they were born, no matter how far, in order to give birth, I thought that was fascinating.
Also like tshuva. It's like, the process of returning of,
Exactly.
our root as Jews, and we may get wayward and lose our way, but there's kind of this pinchel, this spark inside of Jews where no matter how far away we get, we can find our way back. Look at it, so beautiful. And so, okay, so you said you first studied marine biology, but then you told me you're a marine ecologist. So what's the difference? Like, kind of, what did the schooling look like? Is it a master's? Like, kind of take us through the, kind of academic side.
Yeah. So my technical degree is in marine ecology, but growing up when I first knew I wanted to do this, the only term marine science related that I knew of was marine biology. So I thought that's technically the course I wanted to go on, but I knew I wanted to go to graduate school to study sharks. So I wanted to kind of broaden my understanding of the environment for my undergrad degree. So I went to University of Maryland. I got a bachelor's of science in wildlife ecology and wildlife management in environmental science and policy, technically. So it was a mouthful of a degree. And then I just graduated in December with a master's in marine ecology and a focus in shark research and conservation. So for me, marine ecology rather than marine biology is looking at the overall ecosystem and how different marine species, specifically for me, sharks, impact the ecology of the ecosystem. I specifically focus on behavioral studies. So that's more of an ecosystem-based approach rather than a biological approach, which is why my degree and what I am is a marine ecologist.
So do you jump into the water with sharks? Like what does a marine ecologist do, kind of day to day? What types of jobs are available?
Yeah. So when I was in my graduate degree at University of Miami doing my master's there, I was out on the water at least once a week. So I didn't jump into the water, but I was on the boat and we actually caught sharks and brought them onto our boat to do some data analysis. We took blood samples, muscle biopsy, different measurements. And so I was interacting with the sharks, but actually out of the water, which was an interesting perspective and method. But it's the most beneficial in terms of actual science and data collection for the species. And so that's what I did. I go out in the water now. It's a lot of free diving when I am in the water. Past internships and job opportunities I've had has been a lot of just, snorkeling and holding your breath to interact and see what the sharks do, rather than like scuba diving. But it's on and around the water. But realistically, it's a lot of computer-based things. So once you go out and you get this research, you see the sharks, whatever it is studying, then it's all the analysis. So the typical like science lab background, depending on what it is. So for me, because I study behavior, I used something called BRUVs, which are beta remote underwater video stations, and they record underwater life in a minimally invasive way. So once I collected all of this data from these videos, I would watch them and analyze different feeding behavior, how fish and sharks that were on the video interacted. So other than my favorite part and ideal part would be being in the ocean with the sharks, but just being around them doesn't really do the work. So it's where the analysis afterwards. And job wise, I mean, there's plenty of things that people can do, from field tech work, which is what I always wanted to do and thought I would be doing, which is just being on the water and doing that data collection, interacting with people. What we did at my lab was bring groups, participants, a lot of school groups, to go on and see what's happening with the sharks in order to understand better. And that's kind of where my interests fall a lot, is interacting with people, kind of showing them, is telling them how sharks are important and what they do. And so being around people is more my interest with the science, or rather than the analysis end. So right now it's more like marketing in a way, kind of marketing and reframing what sharks have.
So we have the same job.
Yeah, exactly.
And what about fear? You said that we misunderstand them. So did you have any fear when you've gone in to swim with sharks?
I call it a healthy amount of fear. I'm cautious and aware when I am in the water. They're wild animals. You can't control them. Everything I do has been in the wild, so there's no guarantee that we were going to see a shark, and there's no guarantee as to how they will behave. But can learn how to best maneuver them. But in most cases, sharks are more scared of people than we are of them. So just knowing and being aware, it's a lot of looking around, making sure there's no species sneaking up behind you when you're in the water, but just an awareness. So that's kind of my, like, I call it healthy fear, is I'm not just going in and saying like, oh, look, sharks are my best friends. It's, I understand they're wild. Anything could potentially happen. But in my case, I've never had any dangerous, life-threatening interactions. So, I mean, it's I call it healthy fear. It's awareness that they are.
Yeah, my next question was, did you have anything that was concerning, but so far? So what about when we do hear in the news that, I mean, I just read about like a girl that just graduated from college. She was a track runner and a shark bit her foot off. Like, what do you think went wrong there? I mean, because that type of news is terrifying to hear.
For sure. I mean, it definitely is unfortunate, and it happens, and people that get injured or lose their life for it is terrible, and that should not be negated. But it is more on the rare side in terms of actual shark and human encounters. So people are constantly, when you're in the ocean, you're likely near a shark, but you don't necessarily know that. But there are certain things that can happen that can cause a shark maybe to attack or to cause injury, like you were mentioning. Some of those reasons are mistaken identity. So sharks, they're not necessarily familiar with all things, but when humans are splashing in the water, that can mimic a dying fish that's splashing. So they're coming in, and the mistaken identity might be a different prey, perceived to be a prey. Other times it's curiosity. So the way we touch things in order to see, we're curious. They use their mouths. They just happen to have multiple rows of hundreds of teeth. So it's just, it makes sense. But like, oh, it's just using your hand to touch something. But in actuality, like, that comes out differently because of what sharks are and how they are. But in most cases, it's either mistaken identity or misperception. Sometimes it's territoriality. We're in their space. Every time any human enters the ocean, we're entering their home. So that could be an effect. And And that's what happens. It's unpredictable. Like I said, it's the ocean. We can't control it. But in most cases, the attacks that happen are much more blown up in the media than the non-attacks or the safe and healthy and even unknown interactions between humans and sharks.
And has any of the work that you've done, any of your, studying or any internships along the way ever sort of had challenges in terms of your, Jewish needs or observances?
So everyone of my internships, which have been, I've done whale shark research in the Maldives, and I've done shark research a few stints in Bimini, Bahamas, and then at University of Miami. Everyone is very understanding, but it's definitely different. I've always been, some people that I've met through my programs and courses have said that I'm the first Jew they've ever met, and others it's the first Orthodox Jew and what that means. So a lot of these things involve multiple stays, right? So a few nights. So I'm have to bring my own food. I keep kosher. So I'm bringing my own food. I'm eating separately. I'm doing all these things. So it comes with a lot of explanation. But from what I've personally encountered, it's a lot of interest and curiosity from my colleagues. And it's never been necessarily something that has put a deterrent like on my capabilities. The only thing is it's kind of in a way missed opportunities. So my lab would go out every Saturday on Shabbat and go out and dive, and I couldn't do that. And I'd always be after Shabbat, I'd go on my phone, I'd see what they caught that day. I'm like, I missed that species. Or for Shark Week filming, my lab and my colleagues have done a lot of filming for it. Usually those filmings are on Shabbat. So missed opportunity in that sense, but it honestly makes me that much more appreciative of keeping Shabbat, of keeping kosher, of doing it, because there's something that I'm losing by if I weren't doing that. So I've been very lucky and grateful to have such understanding and open-minded and amazing, honestly, colleagues and people I've interacted with that if anything, it's a lot of questions. And I've personally learned more about Judaism from interacting with my fellow colleagues than I have in Jewish day school, because you're not being questioned the way you are necessarily outside of Jewish day school or your fellow Jews, honestly. So
Yeah, when you kind of leave the bubble is when you have to start being able to advocate and explain and do the rebranding for that as well. I feel like we're talking to a scientist right now, so we have to kind of at least do a little bit of a science and Torah conversation. So there's obviously different schools of thought. I mentioned Adam and Eve before, but I am a believer of science. So, is that something that you've looked into, kind of how to, understand both, the Jewish account of creation versus the, evolution, Big Bang Theory? Like, how do you work together with those two maybe conflicting ideas?
yeah, that's a great question, and one that I get often. I've met a lot of colleagues and people in my field that are religious in whatever religion that they may go by, and scientists and others that are atheists that say we're scientists, this is it. I personally think that they coincide and they work. There's not a moment when I'm out in the ocean that I don't say like, look what God has given us. And I think that there's no reason it has to be exclusively you're religious, you believe in God, or you're a scientist and there's no evolution. They can work together. I truly think that there's certain aspects in science that, like, without God creating something initially or something happened, there's no way it could have happened. Like, it's so beyond what is humanly possible in my case. And I think that they go hand in hand. They work together. You can be Jewish and you can follow science the way there are doctors and other things. That is science, being a doctor in the medical field. So it's just different. My specific course in science is a different way to go about it, but I don't think it undermines it. If anything, I see the hand of God greater when I'm out there in the water with sharks and seeing how it happens. It's just they work together.
And we actually made a Science and Torah video years ago with Mayim Bialik that people can check out, where we talk about how, the 6 days of creation, need not be considered literal, that, the word day is not necessarily 24 hours, that the sun was not created until the fourth day. There's, a bunch of different, sort of classical ways that, the sort of science and Torah seeming contradiction can be, understood side by side. What about, I'm thinking about like there's been a lot of interest recently with this Titanic submarine, tragedy that happened. I feel like that sort of put a lot of eyes onto the ocean. Did it, I mean, it's obviously not that we don't know less about the ocean than space because space is infinite and the ocean is not. But I feel like I heard some statistics about like there's so much of the ocean that is still unmapped or uncharted. Is that something that you're familiar with that I'm talking about? That like we really don't know much of what's inside of the ocean?
Yeah, so I think it's about 75% of our of Earth is made up of water, and we know roughly 3% about it. So there is a massive amount we don't know. Um, Even from the shark specific level, like we know that there are over 500 species of sharks, but it is assumed there are a ton more that we just don't know about and we don't know. So there, the Titan submarine, it definitely there's positive and negative sides about, listen, it's something focusing on the ocean, but it's not necessarily for me the parts that want to be looking at. Like there's intrinsic value to the creatures that are in the ocean separate from humans interacting with them. So humans went in the submarine to go and see the Titanic, but there's so many other things about the ocean that are also so fascinating, whether humans have interacted or not interacted with them. And I think that's what's critical is learning to understand it. We also know that there are about 70 to 100 million sharks killed a year, which is a crazy statistic, but um, that is a massive number that most people don't know about. But 70 to 100 million sharks are killed a year, most often for their fins. So shark fin soup is a delicacy, and it funds and drives a lot of fishing for sharks specifically, and it has led to the depletion of many shark species and shark populations. So we're losing sharks at a rapid rate, and that we know about, but we don't know about the necessarily all the benefits of sharks. We know that benefits exist, but at the rate in which they're being killed, we're not learning as much. So I think there's a lot of it's easy to focus on those big titles, like it was how much money did those millionaires or billionaires spend on the Titan, that's like what's focused on. But look at all these other things that are not being focused on, which definitely has an impact on human life as well. So
Is that one of your goals, like in this field, to try to, I guess, stop the killing of so many sharks? Like, is that, would you say you have any sort of career goals of where you see yourself or what you hope to accomplish?
yeah, I definitely have career goals. That's something I'm very interested in. But in doing that, it's more you have to take a step back and do the raising awareness. So I've been reached out to by schools, both Jewish and non-Jewish, and I've done lectures and volunteered and explanations from preschoolers to high schoolers to just like kind of talk about what I do and why I do it. And that I think is the first step in order to stop the killing of sharks. You have to know what sharks are and an actual representation of them other than Jaws or the blown up media perception. So I think that really understanding sharks is the ends to a means of trying to save them and ending the killings of sharks. We need them to balance the oceans in order for our earth to be balanced, for our oxygen to be cycled through, for us to breathe the air we breathe. And